They laughed at an 8-year-old girl in a bank, convinced she had nothing. But when the teller read her balance out loud, the whole room went silent. You ever see a child's face light up with pride, only to have it crushed in seconds? That's how it began for 8-year-old Kayla Henderson on a warm Friday morning in Columbus, Ohio. She wasn't in a toy store or an amusement park. She was in a bank lobby, clutching a plain white envelope like it carried the weight of the world. Inside were her savings. Money she'd collected from birthdays, doing small chores for neighbors, and carefully stashing away in a shoebox before her grandmother finally convinced her to open a savings account. Her grandmother, Patricia Williams, walked beside her, steady and firm, her cane tapping against the polished floor. Patricia's voice was gentle but proud. Go on, Kayla. Hold your head up high. This is your money. You earned it. The girl's small braids swung as she nodded, taking her place in line behind a young couple scrolling on their phones. For Kayla, this was more than just numbers on a slip of paper. It was proof she could do something on her own, that her hard work meant something. But just behind her, 2 teenage boys, Ryan Matthews and Colin Baker, noticed her envelope and the way she nervously adjusted her dress. They weren't there to deposit anything meaningful, just cash from odd jobs. Bored, restless, and cocky, they started whispering. Did you hear that? Ryan smirked as Kayla asked the teller, Can you check my account balance, please? Colin leaned in, his voice dripping with mockery. I'll pay double if she even has a balance. The words weren't whispered. They were loud enough for Kayla to hear, loud enough for Patricia to stiffen, loud enough for the people in line to look up from their phones. A few laughed quietly, feeding off the cruelty. Kayla froze. She wasn't used to being laughed at by strangers. Her small fingers tightened around the envelope until the paper crinkled. She wanted to shrink, to disappear. Patricia turned, her eyes sharp. You boys ought to be ashamed. She's a child. But Ryan shrugged, grinning. We're just joking, ma'am. No harm done. No harm? For Kayla, it was more than a joke. Her cheeks burned, her throat tightened. She wanted to speak up, but didn't know how. The teller, a middle-aged man named Marcus Lee, raised his eyes from his computer screen. He'd seen plenty inside this bank. Arguments over overdrafts, celebrations over first paychecks, and quiet tears when accounts ran dry. But the sight of 2 teenagers mocking a child hit differently. He looked at Kayla and asked softly, Would you like me to print your balance, sweetheart? She swallowed hard and whispered, Yes, please. Patricia placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Kayla. But if you want to, go ahead. The printer began to hum. The sound stretched out the tension in the room. People shifted in line, some curious, some embarrassed for even laughing at the cruel remark. Ryan and Colin leaned against the counter, waiting, their smirks wide. Kayla's heart pounded. She thought about the coins she had rolled, the bills she had pressed flat, the way she'd knocked on doors asking for donations for the children's drive last summer. This account wasn't just a child's piggy bank. It was her effort, her community, her pride. Patricia whispered again, Don't let their words make you small. You know the truth. Kayla stared straight at the teller. For the first time, she wanted them to see, to know, to stop laughing. The slip of paper slid across the counter, but instead of grabbing it right away, the teller paused, giving Kayla a knowing look. His voice carried in the silence of the bank lobby. Miss Henderson, I think you'll be quite proud of this. The teenagers snickered again, but quieter this time. The couple with their phones tucked them away, suddenly interested. Patricia's grip on her cane tightened. Kayla's small fingers reached for the slip, her pulse racing. She didn't know yet that what she held in her hand was about to change the entire room. But before the numbers were revealed, the boys decided to push their luck, and that's when the tension reached its peak. The slip was still in Kayla's hand, but before she could look at it, the boys leaned in again. Their voices cut through the lobby, sharper this time. Filled with laughter, they wanted everyone to hear. Look at her, Ryan said, tilting his head toward Kayla. She probably has, what, $5 in there? Maybe 10? Colin chuckled. Man, 10's too generous. Bet it's nothing. She's just playing bank like it's a game. A few people in line snickered along, not everyone, but enough to sting. Kayla's ears burned. Her lips trembled, but she bit them, refusing to let the tears fall. She wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't form. Patricia stepped forward, her voice firm but trembling with controlled anger. That's enough. You boys think you're funny, but what you're doing is cruel. She's 8 years old. Ryan leaned back with a shrug. We're just teasing, lady. Don't get so worked up. But the smirk on his face said everything. He didn't regret it. He was proud of it. Kayla finally whispered, her voice small. Why are you laughing at me? You don't even know me. The bank lobby went quiet. Even Colin's grin faltered for a moment. But then he doubled down, trying to cover his slip. Relax, kid. We're just joking. Don't take it so serious. The teller, Marcus Lee, finally spoke. His tone was calm, but there was steel underneath. Young men, mocking a child isn't something to laugh about. I think you'd do well to remember that. Ryan smirked again. What, you're going to kick us out for telling a joke? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he tapped the printed slip lightly on the counter. No, but you might learn something today if you stop running your mouths long enough to listen. Kayla clutched the slip tighter. She didn't know what to say. She only knew her grandmother's hand was warm against her back, steadying her, pushing her forward. Patricia's whisper came again, firm and low. Look them in the eyes, baby. Don't let them break you. Kayla turned, tears shining in her eyes, but her chin lifting just slightly. I worked hard for this money, she said softly, her voice trembling but clear. I didn't steal it. I didn't beg for it. I earned it. That sentence made the room shift. The woman in the floral blouse, 2 spots back, raised her eyebrows. A man near the exit lowered his newspaper. Even the couple who had been scrolling their phones straightened, watching closely. Patricia, emboldened, added, She's been saving for 2 years. Every birthday card, every lemonade stand, every time she helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries. All of it went in here. That envelope she's holding? That's her pride, not your punchline. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter before. The boys didn't laugh this time. They exchanged glances, suddenly less confident, their shoulders stiff. Colin muttered, Okay, whatever. We didn't know. Patricia's voice rose, not in anger, but with the power of truth. That's exactly the point. You didn't know. You judged her before you understood a single thing about her. That's the harm in what you did. The teller nodded subtly, eyes on Kayla, his hand still resting on the slip of paper that could silence every smirk in the room. He slid it forward, but instead of letting Kayla read it right away, he looked up at the boys. You wanted to laugh? Marcus said, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Then you should be the first ones to see this. But you won't be laughing long. Ryan's smirk faltered completely this time. He crossed his arms and muttered something under his breath, but the confidence was gone. The weight of dozens of curious eyes pressed down on him. Kayla's hands shook as she looked at Patricia. Her grandmother gave her a slow nod, whispering again, Go on, sweetheart. Show them. The envelope no longer felt heavy. The slip of paper no longer felt ordinary. For Kayla, this was the moment she stopped being the girl with an envelope and became something else. Someone who deserved respect. The crowd leaned in ever so slightly. No one was scrolling on their phone now. Even the security guard at the door had stepped closer, his arms folded as if sensing something important was about to happen. Kayla's heart hammered. She looked down at the slip, her small voice breaking the silence. It's not $5, and it's not a game. But before she could finish, the teller cleared his throat, ready to reveal the truth himself, and that made the tension cut sharper than ever. Marcus Lee had worked at that branch of Fifth Third Bank in Columbus for 12 years. He'd seen everything, from people breaking down because their accounts had overdrafted to proud parents opening first savings accounts for their kids. But this moment hit him differently. A child standing there, being mocked for simply wanting to check her balance, while holding more dignity in her small frame than the 2 teenagers snickering behind her. The slip of paper between his fingers was nothing extraordinary to him, just numbers on a page. But to Kayla, he knew it meant validation, proof. He wasn't about to let those boys turn it into another reason to laugh. He looked at her, steady and calm. Miss Henderson, he said softly, loud enough for the lobby to hear, you've done something not many your age have ever accomplished. Would you like me to read this out loud? Kayla froze, torn between fear and courage. She wanted to show them. She wanted them to stop laughing. But she was still a child, and all those eyes made her chest feel tight. Patricia leaned closer, whispering, It's your choice, baby. You don't owe anyone a thing. But if you want them to see, then let them see. Kayla looked back at the boys. Their smirks had dimmed, but not disappeared. Ryan rolled his eyes, muttering, "Man, just hurry up already." That did it. Something in Kayla snapped, not anger, but a quiet determination that even Patricia hadn't seen before. She lifted her chin, looked at Marcus, and said, "Yes. Please read it." The teller didn't rush. He adjusted his glasses, tapped the slip against the counter, and began slowly. Current balance, $4,213. The room went silent, completely silent. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to pause for a second. Colin blinked, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to form words. Ryan's smirk evaporated. He shifted on his feet, suddenly fascinated by the tiled floor. The woman in the floral blouse whispered, "4,000? Did he say 4,000? The couple who had been glued to their phones earlier exchanged looks, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Patricia smiled proudly. She wasn't surprised. She had watched every step of Kayla's little journey. But seeing her granddaughter stand tall in that moment, in front of strangers who had doubted her, made her chest swell. Marcus set the slip on the counter and folded his hands. His voice was firm, directed at the boys. "This young lady has saved more in 8 years than most adults manage in twice that time. And she did it honestly, through birthdays, helping neighbors, and organizing a children's charity drive that raised thousands for kids who didn't have school supplies last fall. So tell me, what exactly were you laughing at?" The words landed heavy. No one dared laugh now. The few who had chuckled earlier lowered their heads, embarrassed. Kayla's small voice broke the silence. "I wanted to make sure other kids could have what I have. That's why I asked people to help. Not for me. For them." Patricia reached over, brushing her granddaughter's hand. "And you see? That's what real character looks like. It doesn't matter how old you are. Respect is earned by the way you treat others, not by how much you think you're worth." Ryan finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. We didn't know." Marcus looked at him sharply. "Exactly. You didn't know, and that's why you should think before you open your mouth." The weight of his words lingered. For the first time, the boys had nothing clever to say. No comeback, no grin, just silence. Kayla held the slip in both hands, staring at it like it was more than numbers. It was proof of her worth, proof of her hard work. The sting of humiliation hadn't vanished, but in its place, something else was forming. A strength she didn't realize she had. The teller gave her a small smile. "You've done something remarkable, Kayla. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small for that." Patricia straightened, her cane tapping once on the floor as if to punctuate the moment. "That's right. People will try, but you remember, your value isn't decided by their laughter." The lobby was quiet. People weren't just looking at Kayla now. They were looking at themselves, reflecting on the way they had judged, the way they had laughed too quickly. Shame crept into the edges of their silence. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice so only Kayla and Patricia could hear. "You've got something rare, young lady. Don't lose it. Not everyone has the heart to do what you did." Kayla looked up at him, her lips curling into the smallest, most fragile smile. She whispered, "Thank you." And in that fragile smile, the balance of power in the room shifted entirely. The mockery had ended, but something deeper was about to begin. But the story of how Kayla raised that money, and why it mattered so much, was the part that truly left the crowd stunned. The slip of paper rested in Kayla's trembling hands, the black ink shining under the fluorescent lights of the bank lobby. $4,213. Marcus's voice still hung in the air like an echo, sinking into everyone present. No one moved at first. It was as though the entire room had inhaled and forgotten to breathe. Kayla lowered her eyes to the slip again, reading it over and over, almost afraid she had misheard. But the numbers didn't change. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her small fingers pressing hard into the edges of the paper as if it might disappear. Patricia leaned in close, whispering in her ear, "See, baby? That's the truth. Don't ever let them take that from you." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He muttered, "Man, that's crazy. How's a kid even have that much?" Marcus shot him a look, one eyebrow raised. "The same way anyone else does, through hard work and responsibility. Something you might want to think about." That stung. Ryan lowered his eyes, avoiding everyone's gaze. Colin, still pale, leaned against the counter, clearly wishing the floor would swallow him whole. The tension broke when the woman in the floral blouse spoke up. Wait, did you say she raised money for kids? Like a charity? Patricia turned, her voice steady but warm. Yes, she saw kids at her school who didn't have proper notebooks or backpacks, so she started asking neighbors, family, even local businesses to chip in. One small idea, and she turned it into something bigger than herself. The whispers rippled through the lobby. A man in a suit near the back stepped closer, eyebrows raised. You're telling me an 8-year-old organized that? Patricia smiled proudly. With a little guidance, yes. But the drive was her idea. She wanted other kids to have what she had, Kayla, cheeks still flushed, lifted her head slightly. Her voice was small, but it carried. It wasn't just me. People helped because they cared too. The couple who had been glued to their phones earlier exchanged glances. The man murmured, That's impressive. The woman nodded. Puts us all to shame, honestly. Ryan tried to regain some footing, his tone defensive. Okay, but it's still weird. She's a kid, Patricia's eyes narrowed. And what does that mean? Kids can't care, can't work for something that matters? You boys laughed because you thought she was small, but look at her now. Bigger than both of you in ways you can't even measure. The security guard at the door, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. His deep voice rumbled across the lobby. Ma'am's right. Respect goes where it's earned. And that little girl just earned mine. Kayla's throat tightened at his words. For the first time since she'd stepped into the bank, the laughter no longer echoed in her head. In its place came something new, recognition. Marcus leaned forward on the counter, speaking not just to Kayla, but to everyone. This isn't just about money. It's about the story behind it. It's about an 8-year-old who decided to lift others up instead of thinking only of herself. That's something rare, something worth admiring. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted. Where there had been smirks and chuckles, there was now quiet respect. Heads nodded, eyes softened. The weight of shame fell squarely on Ryan and Colin, who had nothing left to say. Kayla glanced around, startled by the way people were looking at her, not with mockery, but with something close to awe. She pressed the slip to her chest, feeling taller than she ever had before. Patricia gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Hold on to that feeling, baby. That's what happens when truth speaks louder than cruelty. The man in the suit stepped forward again, shaking his head in disbelief. You know, I came in here today worrying about my business loan. But now I'm standing here thinking, maybe I ought to be more like her, 8 years old and already doing more for her community than most grown adults. Kayla blushed, unsure how to respond. She whispered softly, I just didn't want kids to feel left out at school. That's all. The teller smiled. And that's enough to make a difference. For a long moment, the entire bank seemed united in silence, reflecting on what they'd just witnessed. Strangers who had walked in thinking only of their own errands were now tied together by the simple act of a child standing her ground. Patricia looked at the boys one last time, her voice low but firm. You laughed at her. But today, you learned something. Don't forget it. The boys didn't answer. They didn't dare. Kayla's heart was still racing, but now it wasn't fear. It was something stronger. A fire she hadn't felt before. She realized this moment wasn't just about defending herself. It was about proving that no one was too small to matter. But the real story, the one that would leave everyone speechless, was how Kayla had raised that money in the first place, and why it meant so much to her. The slip with the numbers was enough to silence the laughter, but the curiosity in the room hadn't disappeared. In fact, it grew thicker, pressing into the air as people leaned closer, trying to understand how an 8-year-old girl had managed to build a savings account most adults would envy. Marcus, the teller, sensed it. He glanced at Kayla, then at Patricia, and decided it wasn't his story to tell. Miss Henderson, he said gently, would you like to share how this came to be? Or would you rather keep it private? Kayla hesitated, her small fingers fidgeting with the edge of the slip. She wasn't used to so many people staring at her. But then she looked at Patricia, who gave her the tiniest nod of encouragement. The little girl took a shaky breath and spoke. Last year, I saw a boy at school cry because he didn't have any pencils. The teacher had to give him one, but he didn't have a notebook either, and he said his mom couldn't buy one yet. She paused, her voice catching. It made me feel bad because I had extra pencils in my bag, I gave him some, but then I thought, what about all the other kids who don't have things? The crowd listened, their expressions softening. Kayla went on, I asked Grandma what we could do. She told me if you want to help, you start small. So I started knocking on doors in our neighborhood. I asked if people could donate school supplies, or maybe a few dollars. At first, some said no. Some even laughed at me. But some people gave. And when they saw I was serious, they started telling their friends. Patricia chimed in, her voice steady. She went door to door in the middle of July heat. Carried flyers she made herself with crayons. I remember her coming home, sweaty and tired, but with a smile on her face because somebody had given her $10 or bought a pack of notebooks to contribute. Kayla's eyes lit up at the memory. I even set up a table outside the grocery store with a sign. It said, help kids learn, every dollar counts. Some people stopped and gave money. Some gave backpacks. One man came back the next day with a whole trunk full of supplies. The woman in the floral blouse gasped softly. She really did all that? Patricia nodded. Every bit of it. And when school started, she had raised more than $3,000 worth of supplies. Every single child in her grade got a backpack filled with pencils, notebooks, crayons, and folders. Some kids cried when they saw what they were given. The couple near the back, who had been silent until then, looked at each other. The man muttered, almost ashamed, I've never even thought to do something like that. Kayla lowered her gaze again. Her voice was quiet but firm. I didn't do it to brag. I just didn't want anyone to feel left out. My teacher told me I should put the leftover money into an account for next year. So I did. Marcus leaned on the counter, his expression proud. And that's what you see on that slip today. Not just dollars, proof of kindness. The weight of his words lingered. Several people in the lobby nodded slowly, their faces touched by the image of a little girl standing outside a grocery store with a hand-drawn sign, working in the heat for kids she barely knew. Patricia squeezed Kayla's shoulder. She's been through more doors in this city than some politicians. And all for the sake of others. Tell me again, boys, what was so funny about her asking to check her balance? Colin shifted uncomfortably. His face was red now, his arms crossed. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Ryan avoided everyone's eyes, staring instead at the floor like it had suddenly become fascinating. The man in the suit stepped forward, speaking softly. Young lady, what you've done is remarkable. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise. You've shown us all something today. Kayla's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall. Instead, she whispered, Thank you. The bank lobby felt different now. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the story, the lesson, the reminder that even the smallest person could move others to action. The woman in the floral blouse spoke again, almost to herself. If an 8-year-old can do that, then what's stopping the rest of us? The words carried, sticking to the air like a quiet challenge no one could ignore. Kayla stood a little straighter. She realized her embarrassment had transformed into something else, power. The laughter had been silenced, but the respect she had earned was louder than anything the boys had said. But the shift in the room wasn't over yet, because what came next would change the way even the adults in that lobby saw themselves. The air inside the bank felt heavier than before, but it wasn't from embarrassment anymore. It was from realization. A child had just humbled a room full of adults with nothing more than honesty and hard work. People who had chuckled earlier were now quiet, reflecting, almost ashamed they hadn't stepped in to stop the laughter sooner. Kayla stood beside Patricia, clutching the slip of paper like it was her armor. For the first time since walking in, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. Ryan finally broke the silence, his voice uncertain. Look, we didn't mean anything by it. We were just messing around. Patricia turned slowly, her eyes sharp. Messing around? You embarrassed a child in front of strangers for no reason. Do you think that's nothing? Ryan stammered. I mean, we didn't know all that about her. Patricia's cane tapped the tile floor once, and that's the problem. You never know what someone carries inside them. You never know what battles they've fought or what they've already accomplished. That's why you treat people with respect first, Colin, usually quick with comebacks, stayed quiet. His face had gone pale, his arms folded tight across his chest. He looked like someone who wanted to vanish into the walls. The teller, Marcus, added, respect isn't earned only by age or size. Sometimes it's shown by action. And this little girl has done more than many grown folks who walk through those doors every day. The crowd shifted, heads nodded. The woman in the floral blouse spoke up, her voice firm now. She's right. We all laughed, even if it was quiet. That's on us, too. She glanced at Kayla, her expression softening. I'm sorry, sweetheart. Kayla blinked, surprised. No adult had ever apologized to her like that. She whispered back, It's okay. The man in the suit cleared his throat. No, it's not okay. It shouldn't take a child standing here with tears in her eyes for us to realize how careless words can be. We should be better than that. He looked directly at Ryan and Colin. Especially you two. You're old enough to know better. Ryan's face flushed red. Yeah, all right. We get it, Patricia. Unwilling to let them slide by, asked, Do you really? Or are you just saying that because you got caught? That question landed like a weight. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it again, then muttered, We're sorry. It wasn't loud, but it was the first honest thing he'd said since stepping into the bank. Kayla didn't gloat. She didn't smile in victory. She just looked at them quietly and said, I just wanted to help people. That's all. The words stung worse than any scolding. The boys realized they had tried to tear down someone who wasn't even thinking about herself, but about others. Shame tightened their shoulders until they stood awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot. The security guard, still near the door, gave a low chuckle. You two ought to be writing this girl a thank you letter instead of mocking her. She's got more heart than most. Patricia's eyes softened then, turning back to Kayla. Her voice lowered, but everyone in the lobby still heard, Baby, don't you forget this moment. People will laugh at you in life, especially when they don't understand you. But if you stand tall and let your work speak, you'll always walk out with your head high. Kayla nodded slowly. Yes, Grandma. The teller leaned closer. She's right. You've earned respect today, Miss Henderson, not just for yourself, but for what you represent. A ripple of agreement moved through the room. The woman in the floral blouse clapped once, softly at first. Then the man in the suit joined. Within seconds, half the lobby was applauding quietly, not for the balance on the slip, but for what it stood for. Kayla's cheeks turned pink, but this time it wasn't embarrassment. It was pride. She smiled shyly and whispered, Thank you. Patricia looked around the room, her voice rising one last time. Maybe now you'll think twice before laughing at someone you don't understand. Because you never know. The person you're mocking could be the one teaching you a lesson. Silence followed her words, heavy but full of meaning. Ryan and Colin avoided her eyes. The crowd looked at Kayla with admiration. And Kayla herself realized something she hadn't before. She didn't need anyone's approval to know her worth. But when it came, it felt like a light after a long storm. But the story couldn't end inside that lobby, because the real lesson was what people carried with them after they walked out the door. When the applause faded, the bank lobby fell into a softer kind of silence. Not the awkward hush that had followed the boys' laughter, but the quiet of reflection, when people know they've witnessed something that will stick with them. Kayla still stood by the counter, her slip of paper pressed to her chest. The fear she'd felt earlier was gone. In its place was something steadier, something she hadn't known she carried. Strength. Patricia gave her a long, proud look before turning back to the room. I hope all of you remember this, she said firmly. We live in a world where people are too quick to judge, too quick to laugh at what they don't understand. But respect is a choice. And today, you all saw how much power words can carry. They can tear someone down, or they can build someone up. The man in the suit raised his hand slightly, as though asking to speak in class. She's right. I came in here worried about numbers on a form. Now I'm leaving with a reminder that generosity matters more than pride. This girl showed us that Kayla looked down, suddenly shy again. I didn't mean to show anyone anything. I just wanted to help kids. Patricia touched her shoulder. And that's exactly why it matters. You weren't trying to prove yourself. You were trying to give. That's the difference between people who live for themselves and people who live for others. Ryan and Colin still lingered off to the side, their earlier swagger gone. Colin finally mumbled, We're sorry, for real. We didn't think Patricia didn't let them off easily. That's the trouble with too many people. Not thinking before they speak. Maybe today you learned to slow down and consider who you're laughing at. Ryan gave a small nod, his voice quiet. Yeah, we did. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't redemption. But it was something, a seed planted. Marcus cleared his throat and looked at Kayla. Miss Henderson, I hope you hold on to this slip. Not for the money, but for the story. One day you'll look back and remember that in this very lobby, you taught adults how to act. Kayla smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from relief and pride mixed together. She whispered, I'll keep it. The security guard near the door added, and don't let anyone tell you kids can't change things. You already did. With that, the crowd began to shift back toward their business, but their eyes lingered on Kayla a little longer, their expressions softer than when they'd first walked in. One woman even reached into her purse and handed Patricia a small bill, saying, for next year's drive. Patricia started to refuse, but Kayla's wide eyes stopped her. They accepted it, knowing it wasn't just money, it was respect turned into action. As they stepped toward the door, Patricia leaned down. Baby, what did you learn today? Kayla thought for a moment. Her small voice carried more weight than she realized. That sometimes people laugh because they don't understand. But if you tell the truth and keep trying, they'll see. Patricia kissed her forehead gently. Exactly. And to never forget, you don't need to prove yourself to anybody. But sometimes, when you stand tall, you change hearts without even meaning to. Outside the bank, the sun was warm, the traffic rolled by, and life moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But for the people in that lobby, especially two teenage boys, it wasn't just another Friday. It was a lesson stamped into memory. Kayla walked a little taller, her envelope tucked under her arm. She didn't feel like just an 8-year-old anymore. She felt like someone who had something worth carrying, not just in her account, but in her heart. And for everyone who had seen her, the message was clear. Respect is never about appearances, age, or assumptions. It's about recognizing the value in others before judging them. So, if you take anything from Kayla's story, let it be this. Don't laugh at someone because you think they're small. Because one day, that small person might be the one showing you what real strength looks like. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, dignity, and respect.